So good evening, and thank you for being here virtually tonight. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. If you have any questions, please just go ahead and ask them. We are a very informal group tonight. Also, this program is being recorded and will be posted on the library's YouTube channel. The Mansfield Public Library is so happy to welcome author Rick Bleiweiss for a discussion of his book, Pignon Scorbion and the Barbershop Detectives. Rick started his career in music as a rock performer, producer of over 50 records, including a Grammy nomination, songwriter, and record company senior as executive, working with Clive Davis, Melissa Etheridge, the Backstreet Boys, Kiss, U2, Whitney Houston, the Bee Gees, and other industry legends, which I want to know all about that. Since 2006, as a publishing company executive, he has acquired works by best-selling and award-winning authors, including James Clavell, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Rex Pickett, Leon Uris, and Kathleen Coulter, among many others. In his latest creative endeavor, Rick has crafted the Pignon Scorbion historical mystery series, blending his love of the past with the twisty deliciousness of a whodunit. So please welcome Rick.
Thank you. So I don't know exactly how you'd like to start, but I'm open to questions or comments. Or Kathleen, I understand you've read the book.
I did.
Good. I hope you liked it.
I loved it.
Oh, well, that's even better.
I loved it.
So Rick, can you start by telling us a little bit about your a little more about your background and how you transitioned from the music industry to the publishing industry to writing yourself?
I will, but I have to go back to my childhood because it really started, well, my parents were huge readers. My father read a book a night. Literally, I do not remember him coming home after work any night and not having dinner and then sitting down and reading a book. And he consumed a book a night. My mother was a reader. She also ended up being an educator at New York University. And they were lovers of music, lovers of literature, and they just instilled the arts in me. And I started off by being classically trained in classical guitar. And then when rock and roll hit in 1956 and I was 12 years old, I just thought I had found Nirvana, and that to me was what I loved. And so I went out and I bought an electric guitar. When I say I bought it, my parents bought it for me at that age, although I did have to save up some of my allowance. And I started writing songs. So the very first thing I did was I started writing songs when I was 12. When I was about 12 and a half, I wrote and published a sports newspaper that I typed out on my old Royal typewriter. And I had 4 carbon copies, and anybody that's way younger won't even know what a carbon copy is these days. And I sold them to my 4 closest neighbors for a nickel each. And by the time the 4th carbon one was sold, they could hardly read it. It didn't go through that well, no matter how hard I pecked at the keys. So that was my first writing experience, was writing songs and writing the newspaper. Then I kept writing songs, I kept playing music. And then when I went to college at NYU, I studied filmmaking. And so I wrote film scripts. 2 of my classmates were Martin Scorsese and Bob Balaban, who are both Hollywood types these days. And quite honestly, once I saw Marty's student films, it made me decide not to go into filmmaking because I realized I was not going to be as good as him. So I stayed with music. So over the course of my time in the music industry, I was an executive. I got my first job as an executive in 1973. So I would have been 29 at that point. But I actually had a job as a college rep for a record company when I was in college. And so that really started me in my business career, if you will. But I also loved playing music, and I played music, I wrote, and then I ended up producing records. You said I produced over 50 records. One of the things that combined music and writing was in the late 60s, I co-wrote a science fiction rock opera. And I was managed by a man named Sid Bernstein. You probably don't know who he is, but Sid was a big deal in those days in the music industry. And in fact, he's the man that brought both the Beatles and the Rolling Stones to the United States. And he was a real entrepreneur. And Sid loved the rock opera that I had co-written. And he brought it to a man named Robert Stigwood. And Robert Stigwood was a major entrepreneur and impresario for many years. He was Barry Gibb and the Bee Gees manager for virtually their entire career. He discovered Eric Clapton. He produced Saturday Night Fever, Grease, and on Broadway, he produced Jesus and the Technicolor Dreamcoat and a few other things. So Sid brought my rock opera to Robert and got a call a week later, and Robert said, I love this rock opera. I'm going to choose between it and another rock opera that was brought to me because I really only have the facility to produce one of them. And they were going to be produced for Broadway, not as a rock opera. And he called back a week later and said, I chose the other one. And the other one was Evita. Wow. So I kind of felt if I'm going to lose out, I lost out to a pretty good project there. Exactly. But, you know, it also taught me something that stuck with me my whole life is that if you don't take chances, nothing's going to happen to you, you know, and you can't let stuff like that get you down. It's part of life. And, you know, I've always chased the pot of gold, the end of rainbows. And I found that the chase was as interesting as finding the pot of gold. And sometimes I found it, sometimes I didn't. So I'm in the music industry, I'm producing records, I'm doing all this executive stuff. I also became one of the leading experts in the music industry on soundtrack marketing. I did the marketing for the first 3 Star Wars, for Flashdance, for The Bodyguard, for Chariots of Fire, and a number of other films. And I decided, my wife was in the music industry as well. She was running classical record companies, RCA Classics and London Deutsche Grammophon, a few others. And we both decided to retire. So in 2002, we retired from the music industry and moved from New York City the next year to Ashland, Oregon. And before I say what happened, I have to tell you that over the course of my entire career, I wrote magazine and newspaper columns and articles, always nonfiction. I contributed chapters to nonfiction anthologies and things like that. So I always just enjoyed writing and found that I had an ability to write. So we get to Ashland, I'm retired, and I started getting bored. And so I joined a lot of boards of directors. I joined the board of directors of the Shakespeare Festival, the Film Festival, the local university, the food bank. You know, I just wanted to use my expertise and knowledge to help nonprofits in the region. And then I started realizing that wasn't enough. That was nice, and I did that for 10 years, but I wanted to do more. And so coincidentally, 2 things happened. The first one is that a friend of ours who lives in Portland, Oregon, who's British, named Christopher Toyne, who happens to be the man who read the Scorbion audiobook, who narrated it. And he comes from a long line of theatrical performers from England. In fact, his uncle was J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, his great uncle, I believe it was. So Christopher owned the audio rights to Winnie the Pooh. And so he calls me up one day and says, I'm coming down to Ashland to meet with this company, Blackstone Audio, to license them the rights to Winnie the Pooh. Do you mind if I stay at your house while I'm down there? And so my wife and I said, of course, your friend, stay with us. So while he's at Blackstone, he mentions to Craig Black, who's the founder and owner of Blackstone, about me and Deborah, and says, you could use the expertise they have from New York corporate life to, that you don't know things in your company, and, you should meet with Rick and Deborah. So the next week, Craig met with us for lunch. And at the end of the lunch, Craig said, I totally agree with Christopher. You both know things that our people don't. I have no idea what I'm going to do with you, but I'd like to hire you as consultants. So we did. And we started consulting. We were on the first board of directors, and we were lending our expertise. Then my wife, who was unfortunately became disabled, had to stop. And I went from being a consultant to being head of business development in 2007. Coincidentally, while all of that's going on, my next door neighbor is a poet, and she's in a writing group. And she said to me one day, I know you've done writing in your life. Would you have any interest in coming to a meeting or two of the group? I think the people would like you and you would like the people, and maybe it'll stir your creative juices. So I said, sure, why not? I mean, I will try most anything. It sounds interesting. So I started going, and it did start stirring my creative juices. And so I started writing short stories. And I even started writing my memoir, which is still somewhere in limbo. But so I started writing short stories, and they were okay. Nothing great. I mean, looking back at them, I could see why they were okay. I was learning my craft, if you will, and getting great feedback. In fact, any author that I speak to, a younger author who's trying to make it, I encourage them to join a writing group and get feedback. So anyway, I'm writing these short stories, and one of the short stories that I wrote featured Pignon Scorbion. And the group said to me, as soon as I read them, like the first chapter of the short story, they went, this is the one. You've captivated us. You need to make this a book. So that was the genesis of the book and my writing career. It was a long way of answering your question, but it's how I got there.
That was exactly what I was looking for. So thank you. So now tell us about Pignon. Okay, well, you should know that the way that I write, because it plays a lot into how this character developed, the way that I write is I sit down at a computer keyboard and I see the book play out in my head like a movie. And my job is to just type it out and capture for a reader what I'm seeing playing in my head. And, I found that a number of reviews of my book and people who have, complimented it have said, well, I was reading this book, I could see it as a movie. And so I can only say I'm thrilled by that comment because that's how it appeared to me. So I was successful in a way in translating it. But when I started, I didn't have the character's name. All that came into my brain was the very first part of the book, which was the Jonathan Bentine's thing of the heir, supposed heir to Gromley's fortune. So I saw that plot playing out in my mind, and I don't know why, but I saw Scorbion's father as being Egyptian and his mother being Haitian. And I can't tell you why, it was just there. I didn't have a name for him. I don't know why it played out that way. And I didn't have a locale other than it was somewhere in England in the 1910s. And so what I started doing was a ton of research.
And the first thing I researched was his name, because I'm going, okay, I got a character. What am I going to call him? And I knew I didn't want to call him John Smith. I mean, nothing wrong with being John Smith, but, Hercule Poirot, Sherlock Holmes, these are not exactly household everyday names, if you will. So I wanted something that I thought was a little different. So I started researching, and I found, I got a list of family names, last names, that were Arabic and Egyptian in derivation and what they stood for in their native language. And I came upon Scorbion. And I immediately said, I love this name for two reasons. One, it's similar to Scorpion, so it doesn't sound so foreign sounding that people would go, what? And at the same time, the Arabic meaning for Scorbion is adventurous, entrepreneurial, and that described his father. And, and I do describe him in the book, so it kind of fit. Then when I realized that his mother was going to be Haitian, and I had to come up with, and it just came to me, how they met, what his father did, then I started researching Haiti and in that era. And I found that there actually was this mountain in this valley that was named Pignon, that was named after the French explorer who was the first European to actually come to that region. And they named the region after him. So I said, well, I like the way Pignon Scorbion works together. And I'll just have his mother come from there. And they name him ceremoniously after the region where they met. So that's how that came together. Haxford, the town that they're in, didn't start out as Haxford. I don't remember what it started out as, but a very good friend of mine who's British said to me, you can't name it that because it was something like Abbottshire. And he said, no, a shire is like a county. It's not a town name. So I had to go back and change the name. And I just started creating names. And I eventually went, oh, I like Haxford. So that became the town that they were in. I have been to England many times. In fact, I won a crossbow shooting contest there at a castle once a number of years ago. So I had enough familiarity with the country and the countryside to try to get most of the book right. And then I called on Brit friends of mine who, suggested adjustments to make sure it wasn't just totally an American's version of what Britain is. So I counted on them as well. I also had people who speak French coach me. I know a little French, but since I was going to have Eve speak in French phrases at times, I wanted to make sure I got those right and the sentences right. So I really did that. And then there's also, this part that is set in the Old West with the Native Americans and the settlers. And so I have friends who are Native Americans, so I called on them to make sure that I didn't do anything wrong there. So I really put a lot of time and research into it. And I wanted Scorbion to be similar to Holmes and Poirot in the regard that they were all observational and deductive. But I didn't want him to be a carbon copy of either of them. So I didn't purposely set out to do this. Again, he appeared in my brain, and he appeared as a dapper, good-looking, sociable guy who liked solving cases with others, whereas Poirot and Holmes are very solitary. And Holmes has Watson, but other than that, they're pretty, I do the solving, you don't. Whereas, with Scorbion, it's like, let's try to get to the bottom of this. Neither Holmes nor Poirot were very ladies' men in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it's hard to find any love interests in any of their books. There are one or two here or there, but Scorbion to me was a man that was attracted to ladies, and ladies were attracted to. Holmes had his violin playing, his drugs, etc. So, Scorbion's got his chess and brandy and other things like that. So I really tried to craft a different character, but that was reminiscent. And then the other thing I did, which I did purposefully, as opposed to it just came to me and I copied it down, was creating it as, in a way, an alternate universe where Scorbion, Poirot, and Holmes all actually existed. And, and that's when I said, oh, well, maybe I'll make it that he met, John Watson and they became friends, and that he wants to go meet this guy, Poirot, that he's heard so much about. So I really tried to make it so that they're this own little circular universe that they all existed in. And, if you can buy into it, great. If you don't, then you don't buy into it. What can I say? I hope I'm not being too long-winded.
Not at all. No, this is wonderful. Thank you. And Kathleen, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any questions that you'd like Rick to answer?
First of all, I would just like to say how much I love the book.
Right.
I love a book that I can just open the first page and I'm absorbed into the pages.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And I felt like I was at the table listening to Pignon talking and giving his, ideas about who did what and why. And I loved it. I think that you definitely did a good job of combining him in that era of Sherlock and Poirot, and that was very believable. And in fact, I wouldn't have been surprised if one of the two of them just came walking in the door at the moment and said, "Hey, I have an idea."
You never know.
And I want to say I don't write often. I should, but I don't. But when I write exactly that same way. Things just, I put my fingers on the keyboard and then boom, there's a movie in my head and I just start. And I like hearing about that from you because most writers that talk about their writing process is usually they make an outline and
Right.
they develop a character. And I tried that, but that does not work for me at all. So I'm glad to know that other people have that same process. And I guess the most important question I have is, when is the next book coming out?
Okay, so now it may get blurred, but I'll move back so maybe you can see it. There it is, Murder in Haxford.
Awesome.
And it publishes February 21st of next year.
Oh, great.
And it's available for pre-order now. It's available, for libraries to pre-order, etc. And it continues the adventures of Scorbion and the gang, and expands them a little, if you will. And they're like in the first book, and this I did purposefully. A lot of books, mystery books, special novels, there's one thing. I mean, in a mystery, there's one case. It begins and ends.
Right.
I kind of prefer putting it a bunch of short stories that in some way are related, but but they're self-contained but related. And so I've done the second thing in the same thing in the second book as well. There's a case with a hot air balloonist who is shot and killed by an arrow while he's alone aloft in a balloon, and nobody can figure out how somebody shot him when he was up there alone. There's a usurious moneylender who mysteriously dies while having his hair cut by Eve. And then there is a blacksmith who is murdered on his way home from birthing twin calves with a friend. And again, they're all intertwined. And then, like the newspaper publisher that has it out for him, Fast and Hardcastle, he's in there, and he's got a reporter now that he sicks on Scorbion. So it's a continuation and a building, hopefully, of the characters, if you will.
I'm really looking forward to that. It's so different your writing style, everything. But I loved it. It was just such a breath of fresh air, and I couldn't put it down. I kept, oh, I have to go do something. Oh, wait, I got to find out what happens next.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you. Oh, no, I'm pleased by that. I purposefully set out, as I was seeing it play in my head and writing it, to use more the language of that Downton Abbey era and keep it true to that time and place. And I'm glad it works for you, but worked for you because we have a ton of stress in our lives today, societally. And there are writers who write things to educate. There are writers who write things to tug at people's heartstrings, if you will, or romance writers. And I prefer to entertain people. I want to get them away from today's stresses to a kinder, gentler time with a classic throwback whodunit. And, let's just escape from the crap that's happening today.
Yes, you did a wonderful job of that.
We, Rick, Kathleen and I, we're also in, it's called a virtual book chat where we get together and we just talk about books we've been reading, books we want to read. We just share, suggestions. And one common theme that comes up just about at every discussion is that the people who, when we recommend books to each other, we say, this is a book I started and I couldn't get into it, and I picked it up again and I really was into it. And it was the time frame or the time period or what was going on around us in the news, in our lives. It really affects how we react to these books. So I very much appreciate when a book like yours does just that. It takes you out of those situations or those moments or the news or whatever's going on, and you get to a point where, and this happens to me often when I'm in a good book, instead of you have to put the book down and go do something else, but I'm always thinking, what's going on next in this world, in this universe? Right. So I appreciate that very much, and I think especially now, the world is crazy. I think a lot of people also appreciate that.
Well, I know it. I escape from the world when I'm writing the book, and I enjoy being with the characters. It's like an alternate universe for me. It's like I've got different friends, and they just happen to not be where I can touch them in the real world. And so I just hope that translates to readers, and they get the same kind of escape and enjoyment. We need it. We need it in our lives.
When's the movie coming out?
February 21st is the next one. Oh, I do have another story though. There's a mystery anthology that came out in July called Hotel California. It is the first book in a series called Music, Murder, and Mystery. And the first book is Hotel California. And the concept behind it is that each writer in the book was given the title of a song that's in the Eagles' Hotel California album and asked to write a mystery story using that as the title of their story. Now, it didn't have to have anything to do with the content of the songs, just the title. And the second one, which is coming out next year, is Michael Jackson's Thriller. And then the third one will be AC/DC's Back in Black. And I have stories in all of them. So the one that just came out, the Hotel California, I don't know if you're familiar with these authors, but Heather Graham has a story in there. John Gilstrap, there's a Jack Reacher, newly written Jack Reacher story in there, and other well-known authors. So it was interesting because my story in there, which is called The Last Resort, is about it's contemporary. It's not England 1910, it's New York and Hawaii 2022. And it's about a premier New York hitman who ends up having a hit on his life. It got turned around on him, and he escapes to Maui. And the story is the cat and mouse game that he plays with the hitman sent after him to try to finish him off. Like the Scorbion one, there's no blood, there's no guts, there's no, it's readable by YA, if you will. It's just contemporary. And I'm pleased with that as well. But it was a real changing of the gears to go from all of the research. I had to research from what the clothing was like in 1910, what they ate, what the stores were like in the villages in that era. And, but that was vastly different than writing a contemporary mystery where I know New York and I know Hawaii, and let's just write it. It still came to me in my head and I captured it, but it was a different process, way less research.
Oh, that sounds excellent. I'm not familiar with that title, but I am definitely going to look that up. I think that sounds so interesting.
Yes.
The whole series, the as you said, thriller coming out and then Back in Black. That's a really interesting concept.
It's not mine. It's a mystery writer named Don Bruns, who's had some good books. He edited, he's got a story in there, and it was his idea to do this. And I was fortunate to do it on two levels. One, to contribute a story, and number two, I signed it to Blackstone Publishing. So it's sort of like incestuous.
Rick, you misunderstood my last question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't say when is the next book coming out. I said when is the movie coming out?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, well, let me address that. I'm thrilled because a UK television production company called First Wind Productions have optioned the series, and they're in development now for a TV series. They've got interest here in the US from TNT to air it, and they're currently writing the script and casting the actors.
Oh, I can't wait. That's going to be awesome.
I can't wait either, but I've got to tell you, it's a long road, many a slip twixt the cup and the lip, to get from where we are to actually getting it made and seeing it on the screen. But we're off to a heck of a start, and some top British actors. I don't know if you're familiar with her. Olivia Williams is very interested in being Thelma, and they've got 3 actors that are interested in being Scorbion. So I don't know, there's a chance that this could actually happen. And I'm with you, Kathleen. I can't wait to see it on the screen either.
I've already watched it in here. I'd want to see it up there.
But, the interesting thing is when I look at books that have been translated to film and television, some have been really, really good literal translations. Others go far afield. I mean, Bridgerton, I think the book isn't quite like the way the TV series came out. I think The Godfather's closer to what the book and the film were. I'm doing work with Al Roker, the weatherman on the Today Show. Well, Al's written a mystery series, The Billy Blessings. He's a cook, a mystery cook, chef, and the books, Billy is a man, and on television, Billy's a woman. So I don't have any idea how this is going to come out because they didn't give me creative control over it. So I'm just as interested in you are as the final product, and I hope it's good.
J.K. Rowling pretty much wrote the screenplays, as I understand it, for the movies, which is why Harry Potter is so close to the actual books. So
yeah, I can write a screenplay, but I just don't have the oomph to do it. I mean, with writing more of the short stories, with writing more of the Scorbion, and I'm also finishing up a sci-fi book now. I kind of I think I'll leave the screenwriting to prose.
Now, what kind of so you're working on a sci-fi book. What kind of research are you doing for that, and how is it different from researching a historical book?
Okay, I got to tell you the premise of the sci-fi book, because that'll kind of play into the answer.
Okay.
The book is currently tentatively called Visitors to the 26th Dimension. And the book postulates that God created 26 different universes or dimensions, and they all coexist next to each other. And there are theoretical physicists who believe this is true. So, I'm not inventing something here. I'm just capitalizing on it, if you will. And that the beings in the other 25 dimensions have the ability to come to our universe, but we don't have the ability to go to their universe yet. And so they come to Earth as vacationers because they want to visit Earth and experience everything. And they're all over the place. I mean, some of them are humanoid-like, some are very different. I mean, one of the characters in it is a 2-foot-tall being that has a fly's head and devil horns, and he raps and tap dances. So, I mean, it's sort of like it. So it's really kind of an interesting book in the sense that one of the two visitors that are here from the other dimension, an earthling saves his life, and ends up that the two dimension travelers have the earthling drive them to a dimension traveler supply post in New Mexico, where they can be able to go back home to their dimension because their stuff got ruined when they landed on Earth this time. And it's the interplay between what they tell the human about what the other dimensions are like, and the human kind of asking them questions about, well, why don't we have that on Earth? Why didn't God give us that if he gave it to that dimension? So it's sort of like, I don't know, it's a little different. So what I had to do in terms of research, really, because this just, totally came out of my mind again, was I kind of had to research quantum and theoretical physics and mechanics to see what would I get questioned on as absolutely impossible. Yet at the same time, when you write science fiction and it's fiction, nothing is impossible. Exactly. So most of my research was after starting the first draft and going back and going, okay, so how do I make a warp drive that can go through the space-time fabric rather than around it or with it? How do I make that happen? And it may never happen, but that was more of the research that I have done into that book.
Excellent. Oh, I love sci-fi, so that sounds very exciting.
And one of the things that I postulate in the book, I'm giving away a little part of it, but it's a cute episode, is that the visitors tell his name's Barton, is the earthling, and they tell Barton that Elvis Presley actually was half human and half alien, and that the reason that he was just so different and so well accepted by the public was because of that part of him that was not human. And they go into how that actually in real life exhibited itself by what he ate. And there are things I learned that I did have to research Elvis, things I learned about him that are truly not earthly, if you will, when you look at what his favorite foods are, when he died, what they discovered in his body. And so I just thought it was, so I made it into a really just cute little side piece.
That's wonderful.
That sounds great, actually. I'm excited to read it.
First, I got to get somebody to publish it. But first, I should finish it. But
Thank you.
My whole life, I was a reader. I mean, I started probably with the Hardy Boys, and and then obviously Christie and Doyle, and then and I also read Earl Stanley Gardner and Ellery Queen, and I mean, just a plethora of early Rex Stout, etc. But I also read sci-fi like Blish and Simak and Asimov, and I read more than just science fiction and mystery, but those are my two favorite genres. But I mean, my single favorite book of all time probably is Zaffron's Shadow of the Wind.
Yes.
I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a kind of a mystery about a secret library, a lost library. I just love that book, Shadow of the Wind by Zaffron. I think it's Zafron.
Yes. Yeah, I have read that. And it's almost, if I recall, oh gosh, what is this, the subgenre? Not fantastical.
No.
No. Oh, I read it. I had another mystery group read it, and it was wonderful. So well written, but the story was just oh, I just can't think of the word. Was it like mystical? Is that?
Yeah, sort of mystical. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I also have been a big fan of more contemporary authors. I love Robert B. Parker, his Spencer series, because I love the interplay of the characters and the humor that he has, which I tried to inject some in my book. And then the other one I like a lot is Clive Cussler, because what I love about Cussler is that he takes these real historical events and then spins a fantastic, untrue story that comes from those real events. And I just found that fascinating. And that kind of was, in a way, how the whole Native American portion of the Scorbion book came to me. It was like, I was thinking Cussler does this kind of stuff. And I just like, it just came to me. And I went, wow, that'd be a cool backstory.
Exactly. Yeah.
What I loved about your writing in that book is there are some authors that write multiple characters. And one of the things that I find confusing and sort of distracting is they will use names that begin with the same first letter, or they'll sound similar. And all of your characters were so descriptively different from each other that even though there were a lot of characters, they were so easy. It was like being in a room with family where I could say, oh, I know you, and I know you, and I know you. So I found that delightful.
Well, thank you. I succeeded then. Thank you, because I knew I needed to do that because there are so many characters. I knew I had to give, some of them are distinctive because like Barnabas stutters and Eve uses French and whatever. But, the other thing that's interesting, you mentioned, start with the same letter. One of the things I did with research was I researched men's and women's first and last names in England from the early 1900s. And I compiled a list of them. And then I would literally check off the ones I used to make sure that I didn't, and thank you for saying that, because you proved out to me I did the right thing.
You definitely did. There are so many books that I've read, and you have to keep going back. Well, what character was that? Oh, that's not the same one. That's just a name that sounds the same or has the same first initials. Or so I found it. I was in that book from the beginning to the end, and it was a wonderful journey, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh, cool. So I've also started writing the third book in the series.
Oh, cool.
And the third book actually has one of the stories that I like the best so far. And it's about a young British woman who decides to become a magician. And she figures out a way to be in two places at the same time, on stage and in the audience at the same time. And Houdini comes to try to figure out and dispel what she's doing. And I won't tell you any more, but that's the setup to the start of the third book.
That's intriguing.
Sounds excellent. Well, thank you, Rick, so much for speaking with us tonight. This has been such a pleasure.
It has.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I thank you, Kathleen, for joining us. And we definitely look forward to your second book coming out. And if you'll come back, we'll have you come maybe speak with our mystery book club. We would, I think, what do you think, Kathleen? I think we'd like that.
Yes, very much, very much.
I just want to say, Kathleen, I really appreciate your comments and your praise, and thank you. You know, it's kind of what an author hopes for. So thank you. And I encourage you to keep writing, you know. And Whitney, the one thing I would say is, one of the things I've been finding recently is that young adults are starting to find and enjoy Scorbion because there isn't blood and guts in it. And there, you know, it's written. I mean, I got an email from a 16-year-old who his mother bought him the first book. And then he literally emailed me and said, "Is there a second book coming out?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "When will it be ready?" And I told him next February. And he said, "Is there any chance I can get an advance copy?" And so I sent him an advance reading copy, and he just sent me an email telling me how much he loved it and that he can't believe that other teenagers aren't reading this. So I kind of pleased that it spans a wide range of interesting people.
Oh, absolutely. And that's as a young adult librarian, it's hard to get a 16-year-old boy to enjoy something. So that is very high praise. That's excellent.
Yeah. In fact, he told me that he read the entire second book in one night. He couldn't.
Wow.
So
wow.
Yeah.
I will definitely, well, it's on my reader's advisory list anyways to offer out to people. So I'll make sure the next time I get a question, that's going to be it. That will be an answer.
Anytime you want me back, I'd be happy to speak. And Kathleen, it was a pleasure meeting you, and thank you for your words again.
It was a pleasure meeting you also, and I want to tell you that you and your wife are in my prayers.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Pleasure
you.
meeting you too.
You too, Rick, and we'll definitely be in touch. Thank you.
Great.
Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.